those of you that are on the call, thank you very much for plugging in. I have identified three kind of broad questions and gave them to Keith earlier this week just to have him kind of speak to from the outset. And then the big idea is that that'll generate other questions from you. And we'll just kind of get into a conversation and spend a little bit of time together this morning. So I think I know pretty much everybody on the call. So I am going to not introduce myself, but I am going to ask the birthday girl from yesterday, Connie, just give us a sense and give Keith a sense of who you are, where you're at, what you do. And Connie, let him know how long you've been in the business because you are amazing. So we'll start with Connie.
Connie Spinato from Pittsburgh High School. I've been in education for 41 years. At Pittsburgh, I've been there 11 years. And I'm in charge of all discipline, RJ, attendance, interventions, kind of everything that nobody else wants. All student activities, athletics. I love what I do.
Great.
You, I won't say, Connie's the only person I'm going to talk about. I won't talk about anybody else, but I know most everybody on the call. But Connie is in a school of 3,700. She is the one person at that school that I think every kid has a relationship with. It's kind of crazy trying to walk down the halls with Connie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy Peterson, and I'm the Director of School Partnerships at Inflection. And I'm very excited to just listen to this call. And we might, like Matt said, we're recording it, so we'll send it out to folks who aren't able to join, and then also might take some clips from all of the great things that are going to get said in this conversation.
I'm Jen Euchre. I'm the principal at Butte Colony High School in Atwater/Merced. We're unique in that we take students from both Merced and Atwater, and we kind of sit in Atwater, but most of our students come from Merced. And prior to this, Connie was a PE teacher and coach. So that's the thing I think I miss the most is coaching. So anyways, and I've been in education for 34 years. I started as a first grade teacher and moved my way up to high school. And I'm like you, Connie, I love what I do and I live it every single day.
Hi, I'm Blythe Duffield. I teach at Rock Creek Middle School in around Portland, Oregon, in North Clackamas School District. And I am the AVID site coordinator, and I teach 7th grade and some of your 7th grade and 8th grade English. And I'm sorry if I'm distracted. I'm trying to get kids ready for distance learning, and we have fresh snow this morning. So they are like out in the front yard right now. But I'm in the University of Oregon PAL program this year, and loving it, loving studying, thinking about how to make schools stronger and serve students better.
Good. Thank you. And for those of you, Keith, you're East Coast, hardcore East Coast. We get a little bit of snow in Oregon and look out. The whole world stops. All right, Nicholas.
Hey, my name is Nicholas Sidlin. I'm the Social Emotional Learning and Restorative Justice Coordinator for middle schools at Taggart Tualatin School District here in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. I'm also in the same program as Blythe and Keith. I'm also a trainer of trainers with the IRP. And I'm just super excited to engage in some conversation. And sorry, I was barely made it. And we're doing great. So I'm glad to be here.
And last but definitely not least, a man who does not need any introduction, and I'm confident he's going to show his face on this call, Torrin Johnson.
Well, I didn't know I had to show my face, so I'm out working. I had hip replacement surgery, so I'm working on that hip so Matt can stop making fun of me about my limp. I'm Torrin Johnson from Merced Union High School District. Been here for 23 years. I'm in charge of ELD, English, the alternative education side, and a myriad of other things that people do not want to do.
I appreciate the fact that we've established that this truly is Coffee with Keith, because when you get together for coffee, there's it's a very personal thing, and we are part of a group that sounds a little bit, except for maybe Connie, that wants to bash Matt a little bit, but that's okay. I can take it. Hey, Keith, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and I'll prompt you with the questions, but I'd love for you just to tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing, Matt. Thank you. So I'm Keith Hickman. I am the just recently promoted, maybe 4 months ago, the Executive Director of Collective Impact, which is a title that I created for the IRP graduate school because I felt the need. That collaboration and collective impact is where we all need to head towards. And that comes from my years of experience of training with IRP, being the assistant and the director for continuing education for the IRP graduate school, and now in this wonderful position to be able to leverage national and global partnerships around this work. And so that's where I met Matt with the California curriculum team and others. And so I have pretty good extensive experience of my own around this particular work. And I appreciate and value all the wisdom and expertise on this call. And really that's where it is how do we leverage the expertise and wisdom that you already bring, but how do we create a new purpose, and new possibilities for the direction that K-12 is headed. That's really, really what the restorative work is about, to be honest with you. And so it's not an either or. I like to talk about it as a both and. And you all are the champions of this work, but we have to learn to bring other champions into this work, up and down, vertically and horizontally. And so I've had the experience of just quickly, because I don't want to talk too much about me, I think the power is in the conversation. I've had the experience of working with the New York City Department of Education for a number of years in leadership position with the Alternative Schools program. That's its own district in and of itself. It's a huge district. I've also had the opportunity to work in juvenile justice with the Center for Court Innovation here in New York City. That's where I'm based out of right now. And I've had the opportunity to do a ton of community-based organization, nonprofit work for a number of organizations, including many years in Seattle. I spent about 11 years in Seattle in the 90s doing gang intervention work and doing work with cross-partner collaboration and things of that sort. So that's kind of who I am. But most importantly, I'm a proud father of two wonderful kids, a freshman in college and at Marist College here in New York, and a daughter who's a sophomore, and a very proud and happy husband with my wife, who's a theater professor, a tenured theater professor in the CUNY system here, City University system. That's where I draw my strength from, and that's where I draw my wisdom from. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Keith.
And I'm on the Inflection board. Matt invited me, and I'm proud to be a board member for Inflection.
We so appreciate all that you brought to our organization and the friendship and partnership. Let's just dive in. Again, I got 3 quick questions that Keith's just gonna kind of set the stage with, and then the big idea is we'll just kind of work off of those. So be thinking about the questions you have as you listen to Keith kind of respond to these 3. The first one, Keith, what have you found to be the most critical school level variables necessary for successful implementation of restorative practices?
Yeah, so there are, let me just frame this by saying Matt, I'm in the process of finishing this up, but I will send you a slide deck with a ton of resources that will point back to these questions that I'm going to attempt to answer for you today. So I want to start with 3 categories. There's infrastructure, there's capacity building, and then there's this tiered support level of engagement, I would say. Really is kind of where the variables stand. Infrastructure, there's a couple of components in infrastructure. Now, some of these things you may be doing well, you might be at different places. Some things you might be struggling with in terms of getting buy-in and support. But I think all of this stuff, whether you're doing restorative practices, SEL, whatever you're doing, it starts with purposeful leadership. There has to be a purpose behind the leadership. And the purpose question and the purpose conversation is so important because it permeates all the way through every team in the school building. So if the leader doesn't have a purpose for this work, and that purpose is not being discussed, and it's a shared purpose across the building, it makes it, as I'm telling you, it makes it very difficult to do these things. Now, I know leaders come and go, but really is the leadership team. So I would say that's a critical piece to this. So in my experience, I've been in trainings and I've been a part of coaching and consultation in a school building where the leader was not involved at all. And so you can imagine how that sets the tone of the climate and the culture in the building. If the leader's not doing it, not expecting us to do it, then why do we need to be involved in this work? I think what that does is it sets the entire school up for a single champion approach, I call it, kind of a solo approach. That means that you become the expert and then everyone points everybody to you. So go see Brandy because Brandy is the restorative practices expert. So that's not how you build community. That's not how you build membership. That's not how you build support. That's definitely not how you build a culture. And this work is about culture climate in terms of a whole school, whole approach. So I'll just point that out. It's something you probably already know, but how do we actually create purposeful leadership? And then that goes with building admin support. So at the top level, who are the leaders in addition to the school building administrator that's really driving the work, that's setting the expectation, and that's creating the support system and the support structures to do the work. Then I would say that it's not just about restorative practices, it's about the whole ecology of the school. So in some cases, I would really highly recommend that you have an external consultant, or you have, like in Matt's case, somebody who's from the outside working with you inside to really look at the whole system of the school itself. From goal alignment to objectives to policies, what are the spheres of influences that are pointing back to the end of the day at reaching the successful outcomes for students? So those are just kind of one bullet point. The second bullet point is school-wide buy-in, which points back to what I just talked about. And people are at different levels of experience, years of experience. Some people are about ready to retire, some people are new, but how is buy-in generated? I think buy-in is generated in a couple of ways. One, getting back to the whole purpose of why people came into the building in the first place. They're there for children. I would guarantee you that 99%, if you did a survey, 99% of the people in the building would say, I'm here because I care about kids. Well, if we care about kids, that's the single data point that we all want to be pointing towards. So I believe in this, I believe in a theory around contribution and alignment. The alignment being what's the change that we're all seeking? And then what systems, what role do we play in making sure we're all pointing towards that one change, that one data point, right? I believe part of the infrastructure is listening and leading. Leaders have to listen. This is a big deal. We've worked at a lot of schools where the leader is not leading with conflict. And this is, I'll share a blog that John Bailey, our president, talks about leading with conflict. This is what Dan Goleman talks about, emotional intelligence, leading with emotional intelligence, leading with the gray zone skills. Leaders have to be able to listen to all stakeholders, especially staff. And if they're not listening to the challenges and the needs of the staff, it's going to be very difficult to lead this restorative work, because this work isn't technical work, it's adaptive work. So a leader has to be an adaptive leader in order to really make the changes and support your needs in doing the work, because somebody has to give up something to make this work. Someone has to, and that's where the tension for me, I believe, lies, is giving up of something. You're asking me to do this and give up this to do this. That has to, we have to enter it with a frame of what does adaptive leadership mean, and why is it important for you, for me, to give up what I need to give up in order to be successful for students with students. And then I think most important is a conversation, a continuous conversation about possibilities. I think the conversation about possibilities creates a discovery of what this work could be and what it should be and what it's going to look like. It's not backwards thinking, it's forward thinking. You are at a place now and you're trying to get to another place. So that, to me, that's the cultural work. How do we build a culture that supports the climate? And what are some innovative and new possibilities that we haven't even discovered yet? And the only way you're going to discover that is co-creating the possibilities. That means you have to have conversations. That means you got to create a space where these conversations are happening. That means you have to use your data and your shared value systems and some unlearning of some things in order to get to new possibilities. Policy alignment, stakeholder engagement. The social ecological model, if you take a look at it, and I'm pulling in constructs that are just, I'm not making these out of my head. This is how I view this work. I don't view it as, oh, restorative practices to fix it. I look at restorative practices as an alignment of a framework to other frameworks. And that gives me the possibility and hope to do this work. If you look at a social ecological model, because the school is an ecology, it's a social ecology. If you look at that model, what it says is at the very top is policy. Policy can influence down, or policy can be influenced up, from the organization to the community on down to the interpersonal relationships to the intrapersonal, you as the professional and what you bring to the table. I believe that a school has to influence policy from the bottom up. The way it's done is from the top down. So you're told what the policy is, you don't have much influence, therefore you have to, exercise the policy. I believe a school, now we're talking about school discipline policy as a whole, but there are also policies in your building. There are norms and rules in your building that you can co-create and create that can align to the policy or that can guide what the value system, what the disciplinary approaches are going to be in that space, in that building. So I think that SEM approach is a great way, a collaborative approach is a great way to start to build and shape what the new policy should and could look like. You all have to be informing policy or be invited at the table to inform policy. Students have a voice in that. Parents have a voice in that. So this is a process we talk about, you all restorative practitioners, fair process. So fair process is how we get to actually shaping the policy and practices and the norms of the building. It is worth the time to do that, because if you don't take the time to do that, then what you're doing is you're doing things to people. And this is you hear this all day long, students and families saying, this doesn't feel fair, this is not right. So how do we get their voices up the table? How do we surface their voices in this work? That leads me to stakeholder engagement. There are 4 key stakeholders that you all know about and you work with every day. You've got the staff as a stakeholder. So that means this leadership, purposeful leadership with staff is critical. So there's an engagement process there. You have students. Basically, teachers are facilitators of engagement. That's really what their main purpose is to do. They're experts in content, but how do they facilitate engagement with students? The second stakeholder is parents. So how do we do the community-based stakeholder work? How do we have real relationships with parents, not token relationships? And I think you all know what I mean when I say a token relationship. A token relationship would be one where you're only calling the parent because the kid, you think the kid's misbehaving or doing something wrong, and the kid might be doing something wrong, but that's the only engagement you have with a parent. How do we create a climate and a culture where the stakeholder, the parent stakeholder, is in a real way engaged and involved as part of the community and the decision-making, some level of decision-making? And then there's the partnership collaboration, which I think gets missed often. You all have community partners, you might have some funding partners, you might have a parent advocacy group, but it's important that the partnerships that support your school also are their systems and their climate and culture are also benefiting from the restorative work that you're doing. They have to be in alignment with this work too. So you see what I'm getting at, the whole ecology is about anyone that has a touch point with that school should be on the same page around the culture and climate and what it means to have a restorative ethos in your building. And then there's the data conversation. And I say conversations. It's not enough for data just to be defined by a small group. Data conversations are how are all your stakeholders informing some data decisions or helping to change the direction or help you meet the changes, what you're seeking in terms of a data point or data points. Data conversations can only happen in group conversations. So if we're not taking the time to create the space for people to gather, to learn, to share, to get support, then how are these conversations happening? See, I believe that school buildings are far too isolated. They're socially siloed and socially isolated. And we're never going to get to really serving students well if they continue to be isolated. And so I think sometimes we think that we're so busy, which you are, I'm not taking that away from you, but we're so busy that we don't even have time to build community. Well, if you don't have time to build community, why are we doing the restorative work anyway? Because that's the core piece of the whole thing, strengthening relationships and building community. So someone, and I would imagine that someone is the leadership level, has to restructure, reconfigure, and think about creative ways to implement these practices in the daily function throughout the day, throughout the week. This is the adaptive piece I'm talking about. Something has to be moved away in order to bring something else in. I would guarantee you, if more schools spent a little bit more time bringing people together to collaborate and do some decision making and doing cross-stakeholder work around collective impact, you'll get faster and further and eliminate many of the challenges that are in your building pretty quickly. And I know this because of the schools that have done that pretty quickly has seen their data points that they were looking just drop. They've seen suspensions drop. They've seen the buy-in and the well-being among staff increase. They've seen motivation increase. All of this, to me, the data is always pointing to connectedness, school connectedness, connectedness for staff, connectedness for students, connectedness for parents, because we know, and I'll share this report, the data tells us that when students are connected to their schools, a whole bunch of wonderful things happen for them. Academic, social, emotional well-being. And when they're not connected to their schools, there's a whole bunch of negative data out there. So we would be pretty much insane if we're not leveraging the research and the evidence that's already out there. Actually, that's the definition of insanity, when you keep doing the wrong thing over and over and over and over and over again. So we need to stop doing that. We need to interrupt that and start to use the evidence that we know that's out there. There's plenty of reports, there's plenty of evidence, there's plenty of resources out there that is pointing us in the right direction. We have to use it the way it's designed. That's implementation science. And so that's the infrastructure piece. Now, Matt, I can stop and take questions after each one. I mean, I'm getting pretty granular.
Yeah.
But I wanna hit some key points as you all are thinking of questions, and then I'll talk about capacity building. Some of these are crossover.
Why don't we, let's just open up for some questions around the infrastructure piece.
Yeah, we don't have to use we can use the chat, or we don't have to. It'd be easy to just unmute yourself and just ask.
Yep.
This is a conversation. So if there's no questions, I can continue to move to capacity building and the other pieces.
Well, I might have one, Keith, which is right now, like we're at one of the middle schools that I work for. We're just now beginning. I mean, definitely not like an inflection level of school change, but we are working towards the leadership, and myself and some of the teachers there began engaging in circle work like early in the year. And now we're trying to move kind of like we're trying to move the school to be more restorative. We have like in general, we have like a pretty good, I think, foundation of about a third of the faculty that are like super on board. It's not exactly a PBIS triangle of attitudes towards restorative work, but it's definitely like, an uneven and then unequal volume of voice. So there's like, a silent middle that can kind of sway either way, depending on which way the wind blows. And then you have like a really strong contingent of teachers who've been at this school for 20 plus years who are super anti changing, anything. Before the pandemic, the number one, I don't want to say complaint, but the number one concern of faculty at this school was behavior. The admin for a while had been like, look, you can't just send kids to us and expect things to change. But basically, so I guess, sorry, my question is really, that's a lot of context.
That's okay.
And maybe not enough context actually, but the question that I have is, when you have such strong opposition to institutional change, and you're talking about baby steps for changes, and you are working with families, trying to get community input, and really trying to, like through Resolutions Northwest, which is a restorative practices firm out here in Portland, like we are sending some faculty to trainings, and like I'm working with them on circle work. But so besides all of that, like there's still this like super loud and large number of anti-change folk. And so my question is, I guess, like, how do you continue to do this, like despite doing like values alignment, despite like all of those things? Like you were saying, I think you said that using data and shared values, like you kind of start to move that meter. But I guess like I'm a little concerned about the lack of movement in a meter.
I mean, there are no simple answers. I'll just tell you that. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I tell you if I had a fix for you, I'd sell it to you. I don't have a fix for you, but I do have this. I know for a fact that behind behaviors are needs. I'll tell you that. Every behavior has a need, even from the adults. And so what's the message behind the behavior? What are people really trying to say? How do we surface what they're trying to say? How do we invite that into the conversation? I think there's power in invitation. I think there's power in a crossroads conversation. And I think there's power in a possibility conversation, because I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. If you asked every one of those folks, what is it that they really want to see at the end of the day? They're going to say that they want their kids to be safe and successful. So that's the beginning of the conversation. It's a how question at that point. There might be a difference in how we might do that, but there's also room to co-create. So how do we make them co-creators in the process? This is fair process. This is the fundamental hypothesis, is that they'll cooperate and be more productive if we do things with them. We invite them to the conversations. We engage them. We identify at the core data point what it is we're trying to change or what we are trying to enhance and improve, and they have some participation in that. We set an expectation around that. The culture is not built on one person or a small group of voices. The culture is built on the success and safety of children. That's the school. That's what schools are there to serve. I would also say that culture, and this is important, we don't talk about this enough, the culture is also built on a healthy and safe workplace. This is your workplace. It's not just a school. This is where you work. And sometimes we see those as separate entities when they really are one entity. And so how do you build a culture and a climate that supports both staff and connects students to a space where you're trying to build a community that for everyone to be participatory? So Nicholas, to your point, yeah, there are going to be dissenting voices, but behind those dissenting voices, there's a need. There is a concern. There is a value. And that value, I think, always points back to young people, to the children. And if we can keep hammering that point home in these small collaborative conversations, in these group conversations, that's important. One of the processes I think that has been really important over the last 6 to 8 months during the pandemic has been a series of listening circles. I've seen schools really start to implement listening circles as a way to bring people in, to have voice, without having conversation yet, without having discourse. We tend to begin with discourse, and then we get ourselves in trouble. But sometimes we just have to stop, give people voice, and listen for a minute. And then we have to build towards a shared conversation around what we're going to do together, how we're going to build it together. But again, I'm going to start from the infrastructure. At the end of the day, the decision is going to be made by the building leader in the school district. At the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. And that's setting expectation and some level of control, and then doing the support piece with the stakeholders. If the building principal is waffling on all that stuff and not committed, it's not fair to you necessarily that are trying to do the work. That's the bottom up stuff. This is not going to be successful from just a bottom up approach. I used to think it could be successful. I don't believe that anymore. I think it has to be a bottom up and top down and even across. It's horizontal and it's vertical. So I think Nicholas, the most powerful way to do that is to start to think about a series of conversations where we're actually inviting people to have voice, inviting people to put it on the table, even if we don't agree with that. We set some norms and expectations around how to have those conversations, and we listen to people for a minute, and then we begin to back into what is the change that we're all seeking in small, like you said, Nicholas, starting with small bites, small movements. This culture will not be built overnight. This culture will be built over years, and will need to be sustained over years and long after you're gone, to be honest with you. So I hope that nibbles a little bit. And then I'll keep going with capacity building. Here are some things that have to be in place. And I'm pulling this from evidence from the RAND study in Pittsburgh. I'm pulling this from evidence from Dr. Ann Gregory, who is someone you all should get to know. She's a guru, a force in this work, and has been for a long time. And she was a part of a policy brief. I'm pulling this from data from WestEd, when they did a literary review of restorative justice, restorative practices. Now I'm pulling this from data from most recently the successful work happening out of Baltimore City Public Schools, a longitudinal study by John Hopkins. Every building has to have a restorative leadership team. Now that restorative leadership team can be part of your school-based leadership team. It could be another team that's doing the work, but there has to be a team that's focused on, that are experts in restorative practice. And that team must be aligning across the restorative work with all the other work that's going on. It does not serve you to silo this work. So what I mean by that is if you have an equity director and you have a PBIS person, and you have an SEL person and a restorative person, and those people are talking to each other, what are you doing? That's the opportunity to bring those people together under an umbrella of school climate and culture, or you can say under an umbrella of equity. And these are the strands of how we get to equity. But this alignment piece is really important, and it starts with people first. I can't stress that enough. So if that piece is siloed, what's going to work its way down to the teachers, the folks who have the most direct contact with students, is that this is a siloed approach. Therefore, we can actually pick and choose what we want. And what you've done there is created program hijack, what I call program hijack. Now you've got models hijacking models. You've got teachers, your stakeholders are making decisions about what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. That's going to impact your buy-in. So it has to be a unified approach around possibility, purpose, around how all these things fit. Now, I'm not saying everything fits together, because everything doesn't fit together, but I bet you most things complement. So the questions I would raise is, what's a program? What's a model? What's a practice? What's a competency? Because you're talking about SEL, you're talking about research-based competencies, and then you have curriculum that support that. You're talking about restorative practices, you really are talking kind of about the plate, the practice itself. How do we bring people together to build relationship and build community? When you're talking about PBIS, you're talking about a data-based approach around systems. So we have to know what the unique qualities of each of those things are and how they actually complement. Because if you get that right, then you get your messaging right around how you're going to do it with the entire building. Everybody has a role to play in that. So even if it took you 6 months to do that, it's worth doing that. Beyond PD, I'd be lying to you if I told you that PD is going to fix and solve everything for you. It is not. PD is important, and PD is important. Only about 10% of what you're going to do in a PD is going to be retained unless it's reinforced or supported by something else. Just being honest with you. I'm not telling you to stop buying PD, but I'm telling you, think about PD as a first step. It's about knowledge. So I want you to remember KADBS. I didn't make this up. KADBS is a public policy a community health acronym. It's knowledge. Knowledge shapes attitude, has the potential to shape attitudes. It has the potential to influence belief, buy-in, and then skills. Skills reinforces the knowledge. KADBS. PD is the first step of knowledge integration. You're going to get a small percentage of people where it's going to change their attitudes. Some people are going to walk away saying, this stuff, I don't believe in this stuff. So how are we going to reach them? How do we get buy-in from them? So here are some things I recommend. You have to have deep continuous learning. So you do your PD, you have to have deep and continuous learning. What does the deep and continuous learning look like? It could be a lot of innovative things you do as adult learners or adult educators in the building or leaders. You can do coaching. I highly recommend coaching. I don't recommend individual coaching necessarily. I recommend group coaching, department coaching, teaching staff. Who are your cohorts, and what's their level of direct involvement with students, and what's their role and responsibility and function? You can do cross-functional group coaching, but coaching is going to be important. And I would say not only just coaching, but tier-based coaching. What do I mean by tier-based coaching? That means that a cohort of your restorative leadership team should be coached on specifics around how to sustain the work in that building. A cohort of teachers need to be supported around what does it mean to increase student engagement, student opportunity to speak, student opportunity for voice, student opportunity for participation. Why am I calling that out as a data point? Because what we know from research is as students move from elementary to high school, there's less engagement with high school students. It's more chalk and talk. In fact, we tell high school students that you should be prepared to go out into the world now. When social and emotionally, they're scared like hell. They don't really, they really are nervous about what it means to go out. They may not be prepared. So we need to be increasing the level of engagement, circle participation, informal practices. We need to be student advisory, high school student advisories, and middle school as well. If you're in a school district that has a legacy pathway, what I mean by that is you have students that are going from elementary, middle to high school. That's a legacy pathway. Imagine if you created a climate and a culture in all three spaces where that student is moving from space to space. They're not repeating, they're being reinforced. If you had staff that did the same thing, that's possibility work. That's just being smart. How do we create a system where students are really feeling social emotionally supported throughout their journey into the world, right? MTSS-based coaching, I just talked about professional learning communities. You have to have PLCs in your school. I can't stress this enough. And some of you might have learning communities going on, but I would say at a minimum, that staff as a whole staff is meeting once a month at least for just an hour. All you need is an hour once a month. I would say 2 if you can get it. But an hour where the entire community has a chance to meet in their cohort groups to do a couple of things. One, to continue to deepen and continue the learning of restorative practices and other practices. Because like I told you, PD is not enough. So you got to sustain that work. That's also a way to integrate coaching into those PLCs, right? The second piece is to do restorative problem solving. How are you addressing the challenges and providing support to those staff that might be trying to implement, but they're struggling, or they might feel vulnerable to speak up and say they're having a hard time? A quick example of that, Matt, and I'm watching my time, but I know I'm gonna respect your time. A quick example is that I work with a middle school in Philadelphia, C.W. Henry School. They were implementing the Second Steps curriculum, the SEL Second Steps curriculum, and they were struggling with it. Principal was a great principal, but was really having a challenge with the staff. When we brought in the restorative practice work and did the alignment work up front, the end result of that was that the biggest problem was the logistics happening in the school. And there were a lot of teachers that were not implementing the Second Step curriculum and were judging it, but not fully implementing it. I don't know how you can judge something you're not fully implementing it. We see this a lot. That program's no good. Well, have you implemented it to its fullest fidelity? We need to ask ourselves that, because we haven't implemented to its full as the way it was designed. Maybe the program actually does work and we just haven't put the time in. So when she started to problem solve around that, it gave a boost to the SEL curriculum and the school began to flourish. What they saw were long and medium outcomes. So they saw student behavioral incidents decrease tremendously. They saw staff participation in the use of the SEL curriculum increase tremendously. And then they were able to build more collegial support around that through restorative problem solving circles. So again, I talk about restorative practice as the plate. It's the opportunity to make other things flourish and shine and do what it needs to do. So PLCs are very, very important. And it's just the way you build community across the school. And it surfaces silent voices. So we want to hear from cafeteria workers. We want to hear from the security staff. They should be involved. They are members of the community and they have input. And in fact, many of them have better relationships with students than some of the staff. And they know the kids in the community. So this is the bridge from school to community. Think about stakeholder groups and how we're involved in engaging their voices. It's very simple ways to do this. It doesn't have to be complicated or complex. Sometimes it's as simple as an invitation to a conversation. Sometimes it's as simple as an invitation to a meeting that's 30 minutes long. Hey, I wanted to invite you. I wanted to get your input on, we're really trying to improve the climate of the school. We want to hear what you have to say about that. And if we use people in that way and we really leverage their voices, it changes the relationship, the dynamic of the relationship in the building fundamentally. Climate before culture. What I mean by that, sometimes we talk about climate and culture and climate. They're not one and the same. You have to build the climate and get the climate right in order to build the culture that reinforces a positive climate. Culture work is very difficult to begin with, because when we talk about culture, we're talking about shared values, shared purpose, shared meaning. In order to do that, you have to build good relationships in your building. You have to have relationships that are trusting. You have to deal with the vulnerability, and then we can have the conversation about what does it mean to reinforce and build a culture in our school. I would point you to, and I'm going to include this in the resource guide, the 12 dimensions of culture. Climate and Culture. It's by the National School Climate Center. They have 12 dimensions. I'll share that rubric with you, as well as some other things. I won't get too deep into it. And then there's student engagement and participation. You probably are doing surveys, student-based surveys. Students are probably sharing with you what they like or don't like. They're probably telling you about kind of how they feel disconnected. They're probably talking about how they don't feel, culturally connected, all kinds of things. What are we doing with that data? Is it just sitting there? And we're asking them to participate. Are we using their voices in a way that's actually helping shape the culture of the school? How are we communicating back to them that we've heard them? So your survey data has to be a way to increase and lift student voice. And your student engagement piece has to be a way, I think, Nick, you were saying this, or someone was saying this, we have to have the restorative work start to permeate into student work. Students will take, I've seen schools in Pittsburgh where students took the lead of the whole thing. They said, step out of the way, educators, we got this. That's what you want. Because the culture of the school, the climate of the school, not the culture, the climate of the school is shaped by the majority of the people in the building, which are students. So if we think adults are shaping the culture, climate of the school, we're kidding ourselves. The climate of the school is shaped between the bells, outside of the classroom, outside of the building by students. So it would behoove us to understand that they are a power base in and of themselves, and that we want to include them, be inclusive in terms of how they're shaping the climate of the school. And then I said real fast. So I'm going to stop there and take questions. And then I can talk about the last piece of some of the second question, which was about the biggest obstacles. I hope that generated some thinking and thought. Some of you are probably doing these things already. Some of you are looking like, how can I innovate on that? How can I build that? This is not a judgment I recommend on what you're doing and what you're not doing. This is a collection of thoughts that I've been able to pick up on my journey through the research and through my own observations around what I think are some areas we can point our energy towards.
Keith, can you talk a little bit, if we have time, can you talk a little bit
Oh,
about
absolutely.
Models that you've seen work in terms of the infrastructure of support staff? I feel like we've tried to do a lot of work, and the staff was pretty bought in, but then when there's a breakdown of even one piece of the process for even individual teachers, it seems to just completely make them like, this whole thing doesn't work. And I can see kind of the breakdown of like, oh, this piece didn't happen. And most often with teachers, it was the piece of the coming back together with the student and that restorative conversation after something happened. And if that didn't happen for the teacher, it just completely painted the program in a negative light. And so I'm just wondering if you've seen models of support staff and supporting the system when there's larger behaviors of how it works.
Yeah, I mean, that is, so the model that I've seen in the implementation around the science of restorative practices does include that. So if there's a breakdown, so if there's a breakdown there has to be, this is where accountability comes. There has to be a conversation around what happened and where did it break down. This is why this RLT is so important, because if that teacher doesn't feel heard and you're asking them to do something, and they're trying to buy in and they're trying to do the courageous work to do it, something goes fundamentally wrong and they want to have a voice and speak to that, where are they going to do that? This is why your PLCs and your restorative problem solvings are so critical. They need to go back to their colleagues and they need to say, I tried this, I'm struggling. And they need to do it in a restorative problem solving way. They get in the center, they raise the challenge, you as the outside group in the fishbowl, give them suggestions and ideas about what's working. Why? Because that same student is moving from class to class to class. So what might be working in one person's class and not working in his or her, their class, may be working in yours, and they just really need collegial support. So I mentioned these pieces because these pieces are the highest recommendations that I've seen help schools be successful in implementation. That's the implementation thread. And in fact, I call that healthy confronting. There is a healthy way to confront people. And there's a healthy collegial way to say to that person, wow, that's really unfortunate that that happened. And what do you think you need? What do we need to do? And what got missed here? Because I want to get to the leadership team to say that this got missed, right? So it's relationships. It's people first in relationships and processes that support the relationships for implementing good practices. And like I told you, everybody's going to be at different levels of this. Richie, where you're bought in and your level of expertise may not be the same as someone else. They might be lagging behind and they don't have the courage yet to get there or the skill set. So we got to create a community of learners for the adult staff. Andragogy is important. A community of learners where the adult staff are being reinforced to actually implement, deep, and continue the learning process over time. I'm going to just take general questions now around obstacles and the other ones. Yeah.
I think staff, teachers especially, are still hell bent on punitive. They want to see, if the student misbehaves, they want to see punitive, they want to see what happens, suspension, whatever. I know that when I first started being an AP, my thing was, if you screw up, you're gone, you're going home. As I get older and older and older, we have a great RJ coordinator on our campus that he's part of my discipline team. And we have our kids that are RJ ambassadors that work in terms of discipline. He still has a problem when we have to go into a classroom and do a circle with a teacher to discuss, okay, there's a situation, this child is doing great in every other class, but you're sending him out on referrals every day. So I think it's still, as good as our guy is, Jonathan, it's still tough for teachers to understand that just because they said the kid should be out of their class, that there's another alternative. And it's still, you're not listening to me, but we are listening to you and we are getting it. And it is hard for a teacher to confront a student that just disrespected them in the class. And even when the student explains to them, you hurt my feelings, you don't understand, I was up all night babysitting my brother. I come to school, I'm late. You make me take my hat off. You don't take me outside and talk to me and tell me this is what's going on. And I think with me, what my frustration is, especially with the teachers, is that they don't listen to the kids. They don't build relationships. They don't know where our kids are coming from. And, we have 3,700 kids and every kid has a story. And I'm sorry, I know our teachers have a lot, but you have to get to know that story.
Right.
Because,
Connie, you raised some great points here. Let me just unpack a little bit of that.
Okay.
So there's a couple of things you said, and this is not just about your school in particular, in general. Who sets the expectations and who is actually accountable? Who is the teacher accountable to at the end of the day? If I'm sending an RJ coordinator to discipline a teacher, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. That's an HR relationship. So what I'm saying is, if there is something that, if the teacher's not meeting the expectations of what we said we were going to implement, that's a conversation between the building leader administrator and that teacher. See, we're having the RJ coordinators do things that's out of their scope, right? They're just supposed to be support, helping do this. So when I talked about this kind of siloed approach, 99% of the time that's going to go wrong because they have no agency over that teacher, right? Number one. Number two, restorative practices does not have to be done in 2 seconds. People need to calm, set for a second. The student needs to probably go somewhere for a space that they need to go to for a minute. The teacher needs to get their head clear. And then we need to have that conversation at some point. But it doesn't have to all happen 1, 2, 3. It's not a technical, and this is not, Connie, I'm not saying this is something you're doing wrong or your school's doing wrong.
Understand.
But it's not a technical approach to this.
But we are doing it wrong because a lot of, Jonathan's been with us for 5 years and he wants to do things a certain way. But when you're told by the person in charge that go talk to that teacher, and the teachers even come to, I want to do a circle with this kid. That's great. But it has to be, there's a process to it. And I don't think we're following the process the way it's supposed to be followed.
So what the teacher really needs, and this is unpacking the behavior, what the teacher really needs is what they're asking for is support. They're not implementing the process, they're not implementing the practices in the way they've been trained or the way they're being coached. This is why I'm talking about these external supports are really key. So where does that reinforcement, where does that courage, where do we value the teachers, where do we praise and value the teachers' attempt at doing it, but they may just not be getting it right. This is where the leadership team comes in. This is where the professional learning community comes in. This is where the coaching comes in. We want the teacher to be an active participatory learner in the process. We want people to have the courage to continue to do that, because what happens is if they're confronted in a way, they might feel highly vulnerable and they may just abandon the process in and of itself, right? This is my C.W. Henry story. This is why it wasn't working there, because teachers felt highly vulnerable. The principal thought she was engaging them, but they didn't have the courage to do the work. So we have to create a supportive environment at in multiple modal ways, so that teachers have places to go to get the support from their colleagues that they need in order to do it. Sometimes that happens in group, sometimes that happens as individual supports. That's why I say that leadership team. So the coordinator could get back to the leadership team and say, hey, this teacher's really struggling. How can we actually help support this teacher in this while taking care of the relationship that was damaged for that minute between the student and the teacher? It may not be as big of a deal as we think it is. And so this, to me, speaks to something else that surfaced, because we got to pay attention to the information, what was shared. The student said, you don't really know what I'm going through. You don't really know my story. There's a cultural humility component to this as well. And this is why I'm saying that if we are starting to think about restorative aligned with the SEL, the DEI, and all that work that goes with this, then you're talking about raising the level of consciousness for everybody in the building to actually think not just about restorative practice, but wow, this student has some things going on that really should catch the attention of other staff members that need to support that student. It changes the narrative fundamentally.
I do think that's something that is super increased this year with CDL, is just there's so many teacher text groups now going on since we're all at our homes, and there's been way more information shared about one person finding out this about a kid, and just we'll text the group, look out for so-and-so today. This is what's going on for them. And I wonder how that can continue when we go back to brick and mortar. How do we keep that sharing happening instantaneously for the day so that the next teacher knows that kid is struggling?
Fundamentally change the way conversations are happening among departments, buildings, and PLCs. Fundamentally change the narrative. Push the business as usual out the door. It's not helping you. You can do business offline. When you have staff meetings, that's valuable time. You don't have a lot of time. So when you have people coming together to gather, that's an opportunity to do many things at once in a short amount of time. Take the business offline. So I'm not saying this is happening in your schools, but in many schools, those meetings they're blame and shame meetings, they're confrontation meetings, they're disgruntled meetings, they're meetings that we're telling people what to do. We could be doing that offline. Like, that meeting is about social capital. It's a time that you're talking about, Richie, to talk about, you know what, I'm really struggling with this kid, and I just found this out. Where are those conversations happening, and how are we building collegial support and support for the student and the family in a way that is restorative?
What I'd love to do is, and I'll model it, I'd love for all of us, if you can, and don't feel that you have to, and we'll just have people throw it out, but just that, we talk a lot in our work about little things. And so in this conversation, what's one little thing you're going to take and actually start to run with? And I'll give you my example. The idea that you've got to listen to the needs that are behind the behavior absolutely just reframe for me a conversation that we've had ongoing around challenges around communication. And I'm thinking about somebody that I was pissed at. I mean, I was like, are you kidding me? Within inflection. And I just this idea that there's there's needs behind the adult behaviors, and I've got to listen better, is something I'm going to take with me and be using tomorrow, because as I reflect back to this last week, I failed famously. And so I'll do my own little restorative restoration with this individual, but just that concept is something is a little thing I'm going to take with me from this conversation. Anybody else want to just throw something out, a little thing that you're taking that Keith shared that you're going to take with you?
I think mine's the same thing as yours, because I basically, and I admit I focus more on the students, not on the adults. And I never thought of it in terms of that they're complaining and grumping because they have needs. So that's something I'm going to take with me also, and be more, conscious of that and work towards that. And I think the people that we put on our leadership team, I was very, very careful on the people I put on our leadership team for our inflection process. is teachers that, there are some people in there that are the grumpers, but I wanted them in there so that we could make them, understand what we're doing. So that was enlightening to hear that.
I think for me, what you said at the beginning, not either or, both and then every behavior has a need. That really resonated with me because I have so many behaviors, but if I really looked at it and got down to the need, I think I would be a better leader. And then, our MTSS community is pretty strong and our tentacles are reaching everywhere. And we have students on our committee and they're a really good voice, but we don't have any classified. And when you said that, I went, what the heck? That's not like me. So I text my committee real quick and all of them, I said, hey, we're missing the boat here. And they all agreed, yeah, they didn't think about it either. So, that's something we can do right away. And then I love the PD by department because they're already their group and we have these department meetings. But if the PD was there, I think that would be, really beneficial. So I got a lot. Thank you.
I think I'm going to talk to my principal about somehow having like an overarching like getting all the teams together so they're not all working individually and reporting out about their individual team and making it more of like an aligned collaborative structure.
I think like you, I latched on to behind every behavior, there's a value, concern, or need. And I'm a visual person, so I would kind of map that out. And I think that's a great leadership strategy to be able to, create change incrementally, as in teacher resistance to something. And being able to sit down and talk to the teacher and say, hey, this is where we need to go, or this is where we want to go or agreed to go, but you're not going there. So where do you fall in these categories so we can kind of address it? I like those kind of frank, open conversations. Is it a need? Is it against your values? What's your concern? And I really like that as a tool for leadership.
I'm living in trying to really get explicit and both in our journey and the supports and the tools that we're providing to school leaders within our program. And the thing that really stood out to me is when you were saying, when the roles are siloed and models are hijacking models. And I think, that's something that we're really trying to be intentional about with our coaching, with our materials, is how are we allowing people to fully implement or to start to align things into roles so that people are talking and those connections are being made. And how, kind of from that doctor do no harm, as people who are supporting coaches and supporting schools, how are we doing no harm as far as allowing and kind of giving people space to really bring that together and to make sure that we're not reinforcing siloing in any way through the work that we're doing. And so that really stood out to me. And yeah, I have a lot more just questions and I'm excited to see the resources and really work with you to kind of break that down even a little more so that we can really integrate it and embed it into the work we're doing.
Keith, I want to thank you for taking the hour this morning. Also, so appreciate your level of commitment to our organization, and I know that comes from a place that your commitment to our organization is a commitment to the people that are on this call, because that's right. Our purpose is to support leaders in this kind of way. And I'm confident I can speak for everybody. So it's definitely an hour well spent. On the cusp of a 3, 4, 5 day weekend, and a lot of food for thought that you provided to us today. So thank you so much, Keith. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate everything you all do as leaders, the challenges and the successes that you're having. But, I'll just leave you with this. This is people work. Processes and practices are there. We don't have to, we know enough now to get you there, but it's about people engagement. It's about purpose, and it's about possibilities. This is the 3 Ps I can only leave you with. And that's really going to get you to where you are. And the last thing I'll say is I will put together the slide deck with all my talking points, and I will give you a ton of resources that will point you in the right direction. So this work is not built in 2 hours, it's built over years, and you're contributing to that. So thank you so much for what you do.